Today we're out here with the 2018 Mazda 3. The Mazda 3 is Mazda's compact sedan and hatchback in America. It may seem strange to be doing a full review on this Mazda 3 when we do expect to see an all-new one for the 2019 model year. However, Mazda has yet to release complete details on that. It's likely going to be at least a year until we can get our hands on one for a full drive. So I wanted to see exactly how the Mazda 3 is stacking up against the main competitors, because this is a model I've really liked ever since it was launched, and I frequently recommend it to viewers that write in. So follow along as we dive deep into the Mazda 3, talk about what's changed since it was first launched, and of course dive into our pricing and comparison sections so we can tell you how this stacks up against the Honda Civic, the Toyota Corolla, etc. At this point in time, the Mazda 3 is one of the older sedans and hatchbacks in this segment, but I actually think it is still the most attractive. I really like the modern design language that we see in the Mazda 3, Mazda 6, CX-5, CX-9, etc. This grille and the overall sharpness of the design is very, very attractive up front, from a side angle, etc. We have LED headlamps over here. These do steer in the corners. There's a distinctive light strip running right through the middle. We also have LED fog lamps down there at the bottom. It's because we are driving the top end trim. Also behind that Mazda logo, we do find a radar sensor because this does have their adaptive cruise control system. Be sure and let me know what you think about the overall look of this Mazda, especially as compared to the recent entries from Kia, Hyundai, Honda, and of course Toyota. Let me know down there in that comment section below. Even against all of those new entries, I still think this wins the award for the most attractive entry. The model we're looking at today comes in at 180.3 inches long. This is a little bit shorter than some of the longer entries in this segment, and it does show because we get a little bit less legroom in the back than in some of its competitors. But the legroom difference in the back isn't due just to the length of the Mazda 3. It also has to do with the side proportion, because you'll notice up front that we have a different look than we see in some of its competitors. We have a longer hood, we have a little bit more distance between the door and that front wheel. In some ways, that gives the Mazda 3 a little bit more of a rear-wheel drive proportion, even though this is still a front-wheel drive vehicle. The reason for that has mainly to do with the exhaust manifold in this generation of Mazda's engines. It required a bit more room under the hood, especially behind the engine, in order to fit it all in, and that gave us this slightly longer length right there. It also helps add to the beautiful proportions of the Mazda 3. This is another reason that I think this is the most attractive entry in this segment. Unfortunately, it does compromise interior practicality, because again, we find less combined legroom in the cabin than in many of its direct competitors. Less expensive vehicles in the US are often styled very sedately. A lot of that has to do with the relative expense of stamping panels and the desire to keep costs low. We actually get a little bit more flair going on overall in the sheet metal on the Mazda 3. I think the back end is a little bit more expressive than many of the competition as well. It's not wild and adventurous like we see in the Honda Civic hatchback, however. This is definitely a little bit more traditional. We have these very attractive looking rear tail lamp modules. They're partial LEDs, so the backup lights and the turn signal that you can see on that side are actually still incandescent elements. Lower on the bumper, these red elements are actually just reflectors, and then we get this sort of air splitter style bumper at the bottom to help improve airflow, and a small spoiler right up top. At first glance, the 2018 Mazda 3 looks an awful lot like the 2014 Mazda 3, but there have been changes over time. In 2017, Mazda gave this a light refresh, giving it a slightly tweaked rear end style, a new nose up front, and some interior tweaks. In addition to that, they reordered the option packages, put some of the features a little bit lower in the lineup, and they gave us autonomous braking at a lower price point than before. But the one thing that wasn't changed in 2017 is the character of the Mazda 3. It's still an awful lot of fun to drive. But if the Mazda 3 before was just a little bit too small for you, then that hasn't changed either. As a company, Mazda has shied away from hybridization and electrification for a variety of different reasons. They seem to be focusing mainly on improving the efficiency of the internal combustion engine, because of course, internal combustion engines are at the heart of almost every vehicle in America. That's why under this hood we see only two 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engines available in America. There's a 2-liter 4-cylinder that produces 155 horsepower and a 2.5-liter engine that produces 184 horsepower. Both engines can be mated to either a 6-speed automatic or a 6-speed manual transmission. Mazda is still very dedicated to manual transmissions. Fuel economy ranges between 30 and 32 miles per gallon on average, although we actually have been beating the EPA estimate for the vehicle that we're driving this week. Although 30 to 32 miles per gallon is below some of the competition, Mazda gets here without resorting to a continuously variable transmission or a turbocharged engine, both of which could impact reliability long-term, and of course the CVT is not going to be as engaging to drive. Expect to see a big change under the next generation Mazda 3 hood, however, because it will be using the world's first compression ignition gasoline engine. There's actually a video on my channel that goes deep into that technology, because I've already been able to drive this generation of Mazda 3 with that engine in it, so expect to see that being available in America probably within about 12 calendar months or so, although Mazda hasn't given us any specifics yet. For my body size and shape, these front seats are very comfortable, but I'm going to have to give this an 8 out of 10 score in this category because these seats are not as adjustable as some of the competition. The model that we're driving has a power driver's seat. However, the driver's seat bottom cushion only moves up and down in one direction, as you can see on your chart. You can't move the front of the seat up and down independently, and that does mean it's going to be less comfortable for some drivers out there. We do have adjustable lumbar support, but it's the manual variety with a lever on the side of the seat. Now, I don't really find that to be a problem. It's not any less comfortable or less adjustable than a powered two-way lumbar, but I do wish this had a four-way lumbar. Now, it is worth noting that the passenger seat does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. We do, however, have a decent range of motion with this tilt telescopic steering column. I found it very easy to find a good driving position. And these seats are very heavily bolstered, so if you're about my body shape, it really works well to keep you in the seat. Rear seat comfort, on the other hand, has to drop down to about 6 out of 10 points. There's just not as much room back here as there is in many of its direct competitors. It's especially noticeable in legroom. My knees are touching this front seat back with the seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. And of course, if I try and move over to the other side of the vehicle, where this front seat is all the way back in its tracks, there really is not enough room to get my feet in the footwell or sit back here behind that seat. Now, headroom is not too bad in this sedan, even though we are driving the sedan version, and sedans are often limited when it comes to headroom. That means that if the passenger and the driver are willing to scoot their seats a little bit further forward, you could conceivably put 4 6-foot-tall adults in this vehicle a little bit more easily than some of the others because of that added headroom. However, legroom definitely is at a premium. Cargo capacity is another area where the Mazda 3 falls behind many of its direct competitors. You'll find just over 12 cubic feet of storage space back here. That means that the trunk is notably smaller than many of the competitors. That's again due to the overall prioritization of space for the vehicle's exterior dimensions. The other thing you'll notice is that the trunk is not as deep as some of those other trunks, so you can't put a bag in that position and still close the trunk lid. That really limits the number of bags that you can put back here. Those of you that want a backup plan will be happy to see that we have a spare tire under there, although it is worth noting that the cargo load floor is not terribly rigid. It does feel just a little flimsier than some of the competition. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the top-end Grand Touring trim. The model that we are driving has the two-tone sort of off-white and charcoal interior. We also have a pretty standard-sized sunroof right there over the driver and front passengers' heads. You'll find height-adjustable shoulder belts over there for the driver and the front passenger, and two-way adjustable headrests. The seats in this model are upholstered in perforated leather, as you can see, but we don't have seat ventilation. These seats are just heated. From this angle, you can see the aggressive bolstering on the seat bottom and seat side cushion. That's something that I personally really like, but if you're a larger person than I am, you might find those seats a little bit constrictive. Moving over to the front doors, the top portion is a soft touch material, as is the off-white insert right there, and then the rest of the door is all made from hard plastic. At the bottom of the door, we do have quite a large storage cubby, and you can also just barely see that we do have the optional Bose sound system in this vehicle. The interior has received a few tweaks since it was launched in 2014, and I think overall the interior has aged fairly well, although some of the competition definitely seems to have a little bit more modern styling going on. On the passenger side, we have a large and accommodating bin-style glove compartment. I had no problem fitting an iPad inside there. In the center of the dashboard, we find Mazda's touchscreen infotainment system. This has been used in a variety of different Mazda models for some time. It's controlled either by the touchscreen as long as you're stopped, or by a rotary controller in the center of the dashboard when you're moving. Although Mazda has promised us Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration, we have yet to see it in this system. That said, we do have a well-designed media interface, whether you're connecting via Bluetooth or a USB cable, and the system features factory navigation integration right there as well. Below that infotainment screen, we find 2 large air vents. Then moving down from there, we find a button for the heated steering wheel, the heated front seats with 3 different levels, dual zone climate control below that, and then all the way down there at the bottom, you find a small storage cubby, 2 USB inputs, an auxiliary input, and a slot for the SD card that holds the navigation database. You can see there's just about enough room in there for an iPhone 7 Plus to sit like that. Behind there we have a fairly traditional console shifter. Drive is all the way back, manual mode over to the left. We push away from the driver for down, pull towards the driver for up. To the left of that we find a sport toggle. It just clicks once for sport and then once to turn off the sport mode. Then we find the electric parking brake, the controller for that infotainment system. We have a direct access button to our media interface right there, or whatever audio source is playing. Home button, nav button, back, and then favorite. And then we have a volume knob over here. You push it down to mute. You'll note that in the center console, we don't have a direct access button for track forward, backward, although we do have those on the steering wheel. Between the front seats, we have two large cup holders. I have a can right there so you can see that for size reference. And this does have a roller cover to shut off that area if you want to. Between the front seats, we also find a padded center armrest with a very small storage area there. You can see there's a tier where you could put a wallet, and then below that we have just a little bit more room. There's a 12-volt power port on that side, and these other two spots are just blanks in this model. Mazda was one of the first companies to bring heads-up display technology to mainstream vehicles, and you can see that over here on the driver's side, although this is still one of Mazda's older designs. So that image is actually being projected on this small piece of plastic that folds up and down from the dashboard. We see something similar in modern Mini models. However, it appears that Mazda is actually moving away from this in their newer vehicles because their newer vehicles like the CX-9 and CX-5 now have the images projected on the windscreen. Because Mazda is a brand that considers sporty driving part of their core mission, you'll notice that we have an instrument cluster with a very prominent tachometer right there. You'll find the speedometer right down here. It's this small digital display. On either side, we have some basic LED clusters. You'll find a digital fuel gauge on the bottom on the right side. We have our trip computer right here in the middle, ambient temperature, and the cruise control status. You'll also see the cruise control status, of course, in the heads-up display that's optional. On this side, we find our trip odometer right there, and then of course the position of the transmission. The steering wheel is one of the items that was recently refreshed. It's a 3-spoke design. We have sport grips up top, paddle shifters on the back, we have down on the left and up over there on the right. You'll find infotainment buttons over here on the left, volume up, down, track forward, backward. These buttons also press in. If you press this button in, we get the voice command option. If we press this button in, it actually changes the trip computer display right there on the right side of that instrument cluster. We have dedicated phone buttons at the bottom, and then the controls for our radar adaptive cruise control over here on this side. Again, the buttons function as press-in buttons. So we press in on this one for resume, and then this one just toggles up and down for the following distance. In our acceleration tests, this model, which again is the one with the 2.5-liter 4-cylinder engine, came in at 7.3 seconds 0 to 60. That's actually about a second faster than the last Mazda 3 that we tested with this same engine under the hood. The last time we tested the Mazda 3, it did seem a little on the slow side, and we never really did get a good explanation about why that might have been. But we did test that model several times and we always got the same number. So I stand by that number for the 2014 model that we tested, and I stand by this number for the 2018 model. This is faster than some of the competition, but actually not that many of the entries. Something like a new Hyundai Elantra will do it in 7.7, that is a little slower than this, but the Elantra Sport will do it notably faster in 6.4. And actually, all the versions of the Honda Civic with the turbocharged engine will go 6.6 seconds or faster 0 to 60, culminating, of course, in that Honda Civic Type R, which is absolutely insane. Mazda doesn't really have a high horsepower corollary to the Civic Turbo or the Civic Si or that Type R. That doesn't really seem to be Mazda's mission. Instead, Mazda is more focused at making core models like this handle better and feel better out on the road. And that really is something that we see out of the Mazda 3. This is not the best handling sedan in this segment. In terms of overall grip, you will actually get better grip out of something like the Elantra Sport or most versions of the Honda Civic with that 1.5-liter turbo. The Civic is an excellent handling vehicle. But those vehicles don't have the same sort of steering feel and steering precision that we see in the Mazda, so I think this is actually more fun than some of the entries that go faster and handle a little bit better. I think that the reason that overall grip in this vehicle is below some of those entries actually has more to do with the tires on this vehicle, not the suspension. So this is the kind of vehicle that you could put grippy summer tires on and you would get considerably better handling scores out of. That's also likely why our braking score was a little on the long side. This car took 120 feet to stop from 60 miles an hour back to zero, and that is a number of feet longer than its direct competition. And again, I'm not talking about the Elantra Sport or the SI, etc. I'm talking about mainstream versions of the competition. Overall, the ride in the Mazda 3 is fairly well controlled. Out here on a gravel road like this, you can still feel imperfections coming into the cabin, however. That's likely because of the sporting mission that Mazda has for the 3 Sedan. But overall, I think the suspension is a good compromise between ride quality and sporty ability. I'm going to have to give this a B- overall because there are definitely softer entries in the segment that are going to give you a more supple ride. But again, I think this is a good balance. Now, one thing that I did notice out of this suspension is that it does seem to transmit larger road imperfections into the cabin a bit more than some of the competition, even competition that appears to be about as firmly tuned as the Mazda 3. Mazda tells us that one of the changes for 2017 was an improvement in the sound deadening materials in the cabin. This cabin does appear to be a little bit quieter than the last Mazda 3 we drove. However, it is still one of the louder entries in this segment, at 74 decibels in our testing at 50 miles an hour. That is notably louder than something like the Honda Civic or even the Toyota Corolla. Fuel economy has been absolutely excellent in the model that we're driving. Even though I go up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass every day, we've been averaging 32 miles per gallon in this model, and this is the model that's rated for 30 miles per gallon according to the EPA. Mazda, as I said before, has a serious dedication to improving fuel efficiency without resorting to hybridization or electrification. Now, they do have their iLoop system, which is a regenerative capacitor and a different kind of alternator under the hood, but I'm not exactly clear if that qualifies technically as a mild hybrid system, because it is quite different than the other hybrids out there. At its heart, it's really just a different kind of alternator and a different kind of battery. If you're looking for one of the best fuel economy ratings in a non-hybrid, then this would definitely be a good choice for you. The Mazda 3 is not a spring chicken in this segment, and as I said before, it's not the best accelerating, the best handling, or the best braking. But it is very engaging to drive. This is an awful lot more fun than many of the competition when the road starts to bend, and that's exactly why I like the Mazda 3. And again, you really could drastically improve the handling ability and the braking ability of this vehicle by simply swapping out these factory tires for some grippier summer tires. The best way to explain the difference between the Mazda 3 and other sedans in this segment that handle well is just how connected to the driver the Mazda 3 feels. Everything from the engine, the way it delivers power, the way the transmission shifts, the tuning of the steering system, the way that we actually get feedback from the front tires so you can tell what they're doing. Everything is just tuned to be as communicative as possible with the driver. The power delivery from the engine is very linear, and that's something that we don't see in the turbocharged competition. The 6-speed automatic transmission has very definite shifts. It feels a little bit more like a dual clutch transmission, even though it is a traditional automatic. And we don't have a continuously variable transmission or a 10-speed or an 8-speed transmission. We only have those 6 gear ratios, so it's a little bit easier for this transmission to find the right ratio. Now, on the downside, of course, that does mean that acceleration is not going to be as good as some of the competition, especially the competition that uses an 8-speed or a continuously variable transmission or a turbocharged engine, of course. But this does have a greater feeling of engagement with the driver. For 2018, Mazda has priced the 3 to start at $18,095. That would get you the Sport model in the sedan with the manual transmission. If you want the hatchback, that'll set you back about $1,300 more at $19,345. That seems like a large premium, but we get the 16-inch alloy wheels in the hatchback version and we get the 16-inch steel wheels in the sedan version. As you work your way on up the ladder, the delta between the hatch and the sedan closes a little bit because the feature content becomes more aligned. However, you should know that when you take a look at the top-end Grand Touring trim, something funky is going on there. Mazda advertises the price for the 6-speed manual transmission in the Grand Touring sedan with the 2.5-liter engine at $23,145, but at this moment, it forces you to buy an additional option package if you opt for the manual transmission version. That actually makes the manual transmission version about the same price, or actually a little bit more expensive than the Grand Touring with the automatic. If you're simply looking for that trim level with no options, you can do that on the automatic. You can't do that on the manual one. Obviously, we were driving the top-end Grand Touring trim this week, which had the LED headlamps that turn in the corners, LED fog lamps, upgraded interior, etc. Personally, I think the sweet spot for the Mazda 3 is the touring hatchback with the manual transmission or the automatic, whichever way you want to go, because we get the bigger engine in that model, we also get the moonroof, the 18-inch wheels, XM radio, blind spot monitoring, and the keyless entry and keyless go system. The first competitor we have is the Honda Civic. The Civic is available in hatch, coupe, or sedan for 2018. That makes the Civic probably the most complete entry in this segment because there's no coupe version of the Mazda 3 or the Chevy Cruze or the Toyota Corolla. Honda has been pretty aggressive at pricing on the Civic. It starts at $18,940 for the base sedan. If you want the continuously variable transmission and Honda's latest active safety technologies, that'll set you back $20,740, still in that base model. The active safety systems are one of the things that separates the Civic from the Mazda 3 because you can get the latest Honda sensing system in even the base trim of the Civic, but it's optional, it's not standard like we find, for instance, on the Toyota Corolla. If you want that same level of active safety gadgetry on your Mazda 3, you will have to pay considerably more, because even though it does come standard with low-speed autonomous braking, it doesn't have the same level of functionality that we find in that base Civic, again, with the optional package. But I think the best deal going for the Civic is the EXT trim of the sedan at $21,700 because that turbocharged engine in that Civic is very powerful, and it makes the Civic definitely one of the fastest entries in this segment. In fact, if you want to go faster than the Civic with the base 1.5-liter turbo and the continuously variable transmission, you will have to pay considerably more for any of the alternatives' high horsepower options. The Civic is a very, very well-rounded entry in the segment. We have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto in the cabin. The interior is well put together. I think the exterior styling is good. It's not as attractive as the Mazda 3, but it still is one of the better ones in this segment. Interior room is good. The trunk is nicely sized and nicely shaped. And the Civic handles extremely well. It actually out-handles the Mazda 3, although I think it falls a little bit behind the Mazda when it comes to overall handling feel. Next up, we have the Toyota Corolla. The sedan at $18,700 is getting old. It's one of the oldest entries in the segment, and it is starting to show. But the hatch is actually the newest entry, and it was just released for 2019, and it'll start at $20,910. The hatch has an available 6-speed manual, or you can get Toyota's brand new continuously variable transmission that also has sort of a single-speed gearbox jammed into it as well. The price difference between the sedan and the hatchback is pretty big when you look at the Corolla, but I think it's justified because the hatch is the latest iteration. We have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, their latest infotainment system, and we also have Toyota's latest active safety package absolutely standard in all models of the Corolla. That means that all Corolla hatches are going to have radar adaptive cruise control, which you don't find until the top-end trims of the Mazda 3. Handling is decent in the Corolla sedan, but it's actually quite good in the Corolla hatch. Depending on exactly how you have them configured, the hatch may outhandle a Mazda 3 hatchback, or they would be neck and neck. It really just depends on exactly the trim level you're looking at. Next up, we have the Chevy Cruze. It starts very inexpensively at $16,975. There's an available diesel engine, and the Cruze should have pretty big discounts at the dealer. But when you start taking a look at the hatchback version of the Cruze, you'll notice that it ends up fairly expensive. It starts at $21,320, and depending on how you configure that hatchback, it could get notably more expensive than many of the other hatches in this segment. If you're looking for a diesel compact hatchback in America, the Cruze really is going to be your only option. And if you do a lot of long highway trips, that is going to be probably the least expensive to own and operate because highway fuel economy is absolutely excellent in the Cruze sedan or the Cruze hatch with that diesel engine, and it should be fairly reliable in the long term as well. But if you're shopping for more of a mainstream trim, I think the Mazda 3 in that touring trim would be my preference. I think it comes a little bit better equipped than a comparably priced Cruze, although again, keep in mind the Cruze may be less expensive at the dealer. Here at Alex Autos, we only talk MSRP because dealer deals do change season to season and month to month. They're also different depending on where in the US you're living. But keep in mind, dealer prices may actually be lower on that particular model. Speaking of low prices, next up we have the Nissan Sentra at $16,990. The Sentra is a great bargain in its base form. But if you're looking for some of the more advanced features that we find in the top-end trim, of the Mazda 3 that we were looking at, for instance, this week, you just won't find them at all in the Sentra. The interior is never going to be as nice as the top-end trim of the Mazda 3. We won't find all those latest gadgets and gizmos either. The other thing you won't find in the Nissan Sentra is a hatchback, of course. That's because Nissan does things a little bit differently than some of the other car companies, and theoretically the hatch version of the Sentra is more like the Nissan Rogue Sport, which you would actually be able to get all-wheel drive on, but is marketed as a crossover. At $22,110, it is definitely in the same price range as many of the hatches in this segment. But again, it's not quite a compact hatchback, although in many ways it actually is about the same size as some of the other hatches that we've talked about here. The Sentra is an absolutely excellent buy if you're looking for a lower cost entry in this segment, or if you're looking for one of the best fuel economy entries in the segment, because fuel economy is very, very good in the Sentra. But it does fall down when it comes to interior refinement, available gadgets and goodies in the top-end trims, and although it doesn't embarrass itself out on the road, it's not exactly the dynamic alternative either. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Sentra SR at this point. The Sentra SR is the turbocharged Sentra, and although it's not to the same level as a Civic Si, or arguably even a Civic EXT in some ways, it is an inexpensive turbocharged entry in the segment, and it is a ton of fun. Nissan has been very, very aggressive on the pricing on that particular model. So if you're looking at the larger engine in the Mazda 3, you actually may find a lower price on a Sentra SR at the dealer, and you'll actually have a little bit more fun in that model as well. Bottom line with the Mazda 3 is that it is still fun, and it is still really a great looking sedan. And I think the exterior styling really is the biggest selling point for the Mazda 3. The infotainment system is a little bit behind the times, power is definitely behind the Civic Turbo, and fuel economy, although very good for this segment, falls behind some of the other options as well. If I were being pragmatic, there wouldn't be too many reasons to buy the Mazda 3 over a Honda Civic sedan or hatch, or the Corolla hatchback, because those are very good values in this segment. They're also very practical, faster 0 to 60, handle a little bit better, etc. But the Mazda 3 has more of an emotional attachment than either of those, and that's why I still like it in this segment, even though it's not my top pick. The Honda Civic is so well-rounded that it is definitely still my top pick in this segment. However, aesthetics do play an important role when you're buying a car, because that emotional attachment is very important. And the driving dynamics in the Mazda 3, although it doesn't handle as well, it is more engaging than many of the other options. That, coupled with the extremely good-looking exterior, those are really good reasons to buy the Mazda 3 over the competition. But again, my top pick has to be the Honda Civic. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. You can also click up there to the top of your screen and support this channel if you want to, or click down there at the bottom of your screen and subscribe to this channel. I'll see you later.